Hello folks, this is Nick and welcome to CB Music Club. We've got with us today, we've got the CB boys. It's Al.
Hiya.
We've got Chris.
Hello.
And we've got Will.
Hello.
Thanks for joining me, boys. First big question this week is, what have you been listening to?
I did find time to listen to the soundtrack from a graphic novel. I don't know if you've heard of it, Nick, called Murder Ballads, which I haven't read yet, but it did come with a downloadable soundtrack. I got it for my birthday from Nick, I should point out, which is very nice of him. Thank you, Nick, for that present.
Pleasure.
The soundtrack album, it's only 6 tracks. It's by Robert Finlay, who is like a fairly elderly blues man, and Dan Auerbach from the Black Keys. And it's really good. It sounds a lot like the Black Keys, you might imagine, but I like the Black Keys, so that's a good thing. It will be staying on rotation because it's good stuff. I've listened to a bit of Teenage Fan Club.
Always a good thing.
Another favourite of yours as well as mine. Just watching some old videos of him playing live at Reading Festival in 1992, which was kind of rocking. Playing God Knows It's True, which has kind of fallen away from their set actually in recent times, isn't it? And it's a pretty damn good song. And found a brilliant performance from New York in 1994, which I think was from a Japanese VHS tape. And so that would be 13 era. And yeah, it was pretty good. It was quite interesting. Norman was getting around. He played a bit of drums on Everything Flows. He was playing bass in a couple of songs as well. And Jerry was playing some sort of weird mandolin-ish instrument when he played, I never remember, is it called 120 minutes or 120 seconds? Yeah, it was really interesting because again, the 13 songs haven't really lasted very much in their live set. So it was good to see these songs, which I've never seen live, although I've seen them many times.
Is there something of a shortage of album names, do you think? Because obviously 13 was also a Blur album and Murder Ballads was also a Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds album.
Murder Ballads is after I'd say it's from a graphic novel which is called Murder Ballads, so it's not really the album. But 13 was it a Big Star? Was it Big Star's first album called 13? Yeah, and I think that's a deliberate reference by Teenage Fan Club to Big Star, basically, or a homage to Big Star. But yeah, you're right, Blur had 13 as well, didn't they?
It probably would have been the name of Adele's first album had she had success earlier as well.
Well, what have you been listening to?
Well, I guess this is where my dark humour comes in because, kind of sitting or lying in a hospital bed all of last week, I was, starting to think as to what might be played at my funeral. And I remember years and years ago, in fact, in 1984, I heard Funeral for a Friend, which is off the Yellow Brick Road album by none other than Elton John, Al. So
my favourite.
I went back and had to listen to it, and I did think to myself, thank God I haven't died in these kind of years in between, because that would not be the song I'd like at my funeral. But yeah, so I kind of listened to the rest of the album. Some decent stuff on it. Strangely enough, all these years on, there's the last track on the album called Harmony, which is quite an excellent song, well put together. So, recommend anyone having a listening to that. I was also taking a listen to one of my favourite bands, the Four Tops, and their 1967 album, Reach Out. And, that track in itself, Reach Out, is just superb.
Do you think that's an idea for a future podcast to talk about songs we'd have at our funerals? Should we wait till one of us dies? Because, like, the age we are, it might not take that long. Yeah.
I have already created my funeral playlist. It is on Spotify. Really? Yes. It's called Nick's Funeral. And
I'm not laughing.
There was a certain point where I thought, this makes sense.
Any minute now.
I'm going to do this. It starts with Steve Harley and Cockney Rebel. Come Up and See Me.
Yeah.
There's a bit of Stevie Wonder, and there's a song which is designed to completely freak people out in the middle of the service by a band called Six Finger Satellite. It's called Baby's Got the Rabies. I'm looking forward to looking down on that reaction.
I was just about to say, I can't wait. No, stop myself.
But you're just going to have to.
Chris, what have you been listening to?
So I came across Bill Callahan, who never heard of before. So the first track I heard from him, he was double tone with Bonnie Prince Billy. And they've done about a dozen tracks together over the last month. But then I came across an album by Bill Callahan, which is also just out this year, called Gold Record. And it's very kind of lo-fi, sort of alt country, almost spoken word at times. And it's stories. It's really kind of strong narrative tales, quite dark, some of them. That kind of sort of deadpan delivery of subjects that are quite humorous, but very human. And then since it's Christmas, I went back and dug out an album that came out a couple of years ago that I kind of missed. Ada Moffat and R.M. Hubbard doing their Ghost Stories for Christmas, I think it's called.
Yeah, I know that, and I love that.
A lovely album. And actually, coincidentally, it's got a cover of Lonely This Christmas by Mud that we were speaking at last time's CB Music Club. And it's got a couple of cover versions. They do Only You, the old Yazoo song,
yes.
which obviously was a Christmas #1 by the Flying Pickets, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Only You, which is probably why it's popped up on this album. It's quite dark, but in its darkness, there's a real joy and a real lightness of kind of humanity in there. Both very, very human albums. Quite funny in their kind of special way.
Very good. Well, funnily enough, you were listening to Aidan Moffat, because one of the things I've been listening to was the recent Arab Strap single, which came out, I think, in September. The first single in 15 years. It's called The Turning of Our Bones. Really enjoying that, described as a voodoo spell. And they're talking about they're back from the grave and ready to rave. Which I liked. I was enjoying that, and actually, I suppose what I've been listening to, there's been a fair bit of Scottish nostalgia. I was listening to the Bluebells as well.
Oh, yeah.
I got a reissue of an album from the early 80s, Sisters, which is if you remember things like Young at Heart and
yes,
Everybody's Somebody's Fool and so on. So I was getting into
a cover
that
of a Bananarama song, incidentally, Young at Heart, for those who don't know. Yeah, Bobby Bluebell was going out with Siobhan Fahey at the time, yes. And so it's a co-written between the two of them, I believe. But yeah, if you have never heard Bananarama's version, don't bother, it's terrible. But yeah, they did it first.
I was listening to a bit of Trash Can Sinatra's. That was the third wheel in my Scottish Nostalgia Fest. An album called Weightlifting, which is probably their fifth album. But it's a cracker as well.
Very good.
So
Keeping it Scottish.
Keeping it Scottish.
Keeping it Scottish.
And what are you drinking, boys? Seeing as we're talking about being Scottish.
I'm drinking a Scottish classic, the Brewdog Punk IPA.
Aye.
Keeping it Scottish.
Brilliant.
I'm going to open this one here live on air. Here we go.
Wow.
This is
Eventually going to open.
Here you go. This is a first for the CB Music Club. This was sent to me by friend of the show, Paddy McVeigh, all the way from New Zealand.
Oh, really?
So this is Castle's New Zealand Milk Stout.
Wonderful. Well, Paddy, that was very kind of you, and thanks for listening. I hope you're doing well.
Cheers,
Good man.
Paddy.
Very good. Well done, Paddy. What about you, Will? What are you drinking?
The usual ginger cordial and soda water, I'm afraid. I'm still in the no drink zone. I'm likely to be even more in it for the next few months, but hey ho. I quite like ginger cordial and soda water, though.
Yeah, it's lovely.
Good for you.
Fair.
It's not as nice as beer, though.
I'm on the ginger beer, actually.
What kind?
Bar's ginger beer, actually. That's what they had in the corner shop. But the good news is I've got rum in it. I have a bottle of Liverpool Lost Dock rum, which is an English-style Caribbean spiced rum, which somebody gave me for my birthday.
Lovely.
Thank you, Sparky and Jules. That was very nice, and it is very nice. It's going down a treat. There's actually more gone from the bottle than I realised. How that happened.
Sparky and Jules. That sounds like the sort of TV kids show that Chris will be working on.
Yeah, already in development.
Yeah,
Right.
or it is now.
Okay, well there we go. That's the drinks Orders.
Lovely. Cheers, chaps.
Cheers.
Yeah, cheers. Everyone.
Next, we're going to, I think, hear from Al, who's going to tell us about 1984.
So, 1984, pretty much like every year of my life when we haven't had either Tony Blair or Gordon Brown as the Prime Minister, it was something of a political hellscape, really. We're just at the start of the second Thatcher government, despite the fact that they had been a complete economic disaster in their first term. They were as inept diplomatically as they were economically, which led to a war, which needn't have happened, which led to them winning both the war and a landslide victory in the general election in 1983. So these social conservatives with their weird economic ideologies are setting about dismantling public life in the UK, something that's been going on to this day. It was a year of soaring unemployment, economic hell. Miners' strike began when the NUM went on strike in opposition to pit closures, which went on well into 1985. Terrible, terrible times for the miners. And however much you might think that the industry had to change, and it did, because obviously it's very polluting, this was not the way to go about it. Rather remarkably, there was an IRA bombing of the Grand Hotel in Brighton, where the Prime Minister and Cabinet were staying during the Tory party conference, which killed 5 people, but Thatcher obviously escaped unharmed. Strange days, not like now at all. But this is not a political podcast, so I'll rein in my ranting lefty tendencies and just talk about the music.
Sound like one.
The story of the year musically should have been Frankie Goes to Hollywood, and also the BBC demonstrating beautifully the whole concept of unintended consequences. Frankie had released their debut single Relax in October of 1983, and it had floated around the nether regions of the charts ever since then, until they made an appearance on Top of the Pops early in 1984, which saw the record rise into the top 10. 3 days later, the Radio 1 breakfast DJ Mike Reid was playing the song on his breakfast show and took exception to both the cover and the lyrics of the song for apparently being obscene. And he was so outraged that he actually stopped the record while it was playing and went off on a rant about how offensive the whole thing was. And 2 days later, the BBC completely banned the record from being played on any BBC radio stations or television, which led to an enormous soar in sales and straight to number 1, where it remained for 5 weeks. And it actually remained in the charts for almost the entirety of 1984. Their follow-up single came out in June, which is Two Tribes, which is a fantastic song with an excellent Godley and Cream directed video. And the success of Two Tribes led to another sales resurgence for Relax. And it was in the top 10 itself for almost the whole of the 9 weeks that Two Tribes was at number 1. It was actually at number 2 in the charts for 2 of those weeks. And having the same band at number 1 and number 2 is something that hadn't happened since the early 60s. And I'm not sure if it's happened since, but I could be wrong about that.
Ed Sheeran, probably.
Ed Sheeran. Yeah, well, the charts
Yeah.
the charts were different by then. It wasn't based on single sales, yeah. And they did have another number 1 later in the year with The Power of Love, which was a number 1 for a week in December. And they had a 4th single from their album, the title track, Welcome to the Pleasure Dome, which got to number 3 in 1985. The light that shone so brightly went rather pale after that, and they disappeared for 2 years, and by the time they returned, the critical acclaim had gone, and it was all a bit of a disaster. They should have been the story of the year, along with Wham, who also had a phenomenal year, 2 number 1 singles, and George Michael, obviously with Careless Whisper, was at number 1 for a while as well. But of course, the story of the year is Band-Aid, and October 23rd, Michael Burke did a report on the Ethiopian famine on BBC News, which to this day is incredibly harrowing. 8 million people apparently afflicted by the famine, and it's just horrifying. And of course, this prompted Bob Geldof, with the help of Midge to put together a supergroup to record a song which Geldof had quickly written lyrics for and Midge quickly wrote music for. And it's difficult to credit in the celebrity landscape of today just how much Geldof had to harangue people to actually take part in this. Nowadays, such a project, you need the military to hold back your Britain's Got Talent and X Factor stars. Back then, that sort of celebrity campaigning wasn't really a thing. they recorded the single and had it out for Christmas, and of course it was #1 for 5 weeks, keeping Wham off the top spot. And I noticed with some amusement today that as we record this, that Wham are again at #2 in the charts with Last Christmas, behind that god-awful Mariah Carey song.
It was recorded on my birthday.
Yes, I know that. I was coming to that. It's not just footballers dying on your birthday, is it? It's also what was then for the next 13 years the biggest selling single ever in UK history. And we don't talk about the song that replaced it.
Talk about the song that replaced it. I don't know what that is.
Oh God, it's Candle in the Bloody Wind. Goodbye, England's Rose. The even worse version of Candle in the Wind.
What kind of tragedy is it going to take to knock that off the top spot?
God, I don't know. End of the world. I don't know.
I was going to say, do you know, the thing that amazes me about that Band-Aid single was it was recorded at the end of November, and they managed to record it, mix it, print it on vinyl, and release it, and it was Christmas #1. And it was bought by... I mean, that's an extraordinary effort to turn that production around in such a short space of time, surely. That's pretty punk.
Yeah, what do you think? What do you all think of the song? Because a lot of people really hate it. Do they know it's Christmas? I think it's all right.
I like it.
Yeah,
Quite
good song.
uplifting, personally.
Good
I like
song.
it, yeah.
Difficult to separate the song from the whole events around it.
I like the song. I like the song, but I find the lyrics slightly strange. Because you've got, do they know it's Christmas time at all? No, because a lot of them, kind of choose to kind of worship Islam.
Well, that's the kind of cynicism
that
that bothers me about it. He's like, he banged it out overnight, He didn't spend months writing this, he just did it, and then Majur just wrote a tune to go with it. I think that...
The famine was in Ethiopia. Ethiopia was the second country in the world to adopt Christianity as its state religion after Armenia. So there are...
Yeah, but it was turning the other way at that point.
Anyway, good song, great intentions, did a lot of good.
Eurovision Song Contest. It was in Luxembourg in 1984. Sweden won it again, like they did last time we discussed this, except it wasn't ABBA. It was the Harrys with Diggy Loo, Diggy Lay. And once again, folks, I've listened to this song, so you don't have to. It's terrible. But, it won the Eurovision Song Contest, so who am I? I've never won a Eurovision Song Contest.
It was the best song in Europe that year.
Some things we lost in 1984. The Police split up, which is not in itself a bad thing, because I was never really a fan. Yeah. But it did then inflict upon us Sting's solo career, which is a horror almost as great as the Ethiopian famine. Alexis Corner, he died. Alexis Corner made probably the best Top of the Pops theme tune of them all. Although Phil Lynot's Yellow Pearl, maybe, I don't know. But his cover, Alexis Corner's cover of A Whole Lot of Love, the Led Zeppelin song, classic Top of the Pops, absolutely brilliant. Jackie Wilson died. Love Jackie Wilson. I'd imagine you're probably a fan, Will.
I do like Fields of Gold.
Yeah, great darts player.
Of course you don't.
World champion, can't say fairer than that. Marvin Gaye, his father shot him dead. That was 1984. Count Basie died. And Razzle from Hanoi Rocks, the drummer, who was of course killed in a car crash. Vince Neil from Motley Crue driving after they'd gone out on a booze run while drunk. Yeah, so that's my roundup of 1984 music.
Welcome back, folks. This week we are talking about Purple Rain from 1984, which I had chosen as an album for a number of reasons, but mainly because Prince is somebody that I sort of kind of like the idea of, but haven't really done enough listening. And it's somebody that I wanted to explore a little bit more and figure out what it was that everybody sees in him, and maybe Purple Rain was going to be the answer. So Purple Rain was released on June 25, 1984. This is Prince's 6th studio album, so well into a career by this point. Also the soundtrack to the film of the same name, Purple Rain. And it's the first album that he'd released where the Revolution were up in the title as well. And I think there's a number of reasons for that, not least that this is also an album where the last three songs are live recordings with him and the Revolution Band, but also because I think he had co-written a fair bit of this album with them. It's kind of generally regarded, I think, as his most pop record and probably his best known record. It was his first album to get to number one in America. It was number one in 1984 for 24 weeks. So we were talking earlier about how 1984 was the year of Frankie Goes to Hollywood, but in America it was very much Prince's year. When Doves Cry and Let's Go Crazy were both number one singles. Purple Rain was number two, and I Would Die For You was at number 8. He won Grammys for Best Rock Vocal Performance by Duo or Group and Best Score Soundtrack for Visual Media. He also won the Oscar in 1984 for Best Original Song Score. So Prince was everywhere this year, and I think there's some quote somewhere I was reading where the only person that could have beaten Reagan in the American election was Prince. He was that popular. And Reagan, I think, in that year only lost one state in the whole of the USA, which is remarkable. So that was Prince's most memorable year, I think, in terms of the height of his fame. He was everywhere. He'd gone pop, where before he'd been, I think, a little bit sort of certainly regarded as esoteric, and it was different musical genres that he was playing with, but he really came into the mainstream here. And I think this was right in the middle of the years where he was producing his best-selling records, probably somewhere between kind of 80, 82 and 87 was when he was really at the peak of his fame and doing remarkable things. And he is a remarkable character as well. So I think we're going to have quite a lot to talk about here. So I listened to the album and had a lot to figure out about it because I just hate some of that synthesized sound, some of the production techniques that were going around about that time. I don't like the sound of the drums and the synths, the keyboards and things like that. But I came around on this album, and there's some great songs in it, and actually I can see why he was at the peak of his powers at that point. What did you guys think?
Prior to listening to it, I was a bit like yourself, Nick, where Prince is someone that I don't know a great deal about, and when I've listened to him, I've always been a bit disappointed. But I like the idea of Prince, and I do think of him as being a phenomenally talented man. He just to the sheer number of songs that he wrote, I mean, phenomenal output, which takes a lot of talent to be able to do that. Also, an exceptionally good guitar player, which I can always appreciate as well. You know, first listen, it was kind of better and worse than I expected at the same time. It's not aged particularly well, let's put it that way. We'll come back to that. Chris, what did you think?
I wasn't a huge Prince fan, but some of my good friends at school were very much into Prince, so kind of sort of absorbed him. So I kind of knew this album, but I hadn't listened to it for a very long time. And when I came back to it this time around, my first impressions were this is a very, very 80s album, and I didn't really think that in a good way. And I do agree with you, Al, that, again, my first impressions was it hasn't aged at all well. And my third impression was those outros go on for a very long time. But after many, many, many listens to, I was right back into it again. And yeah, it's a great album.
That's kind of where I was at. I went through that thing of going, what the hell is this, and why am I spending time doing it? Probably actually because I watched the film and it started to take me back to another time, and it started to make a little bit more sense.
I took against Prince from the very first moment I saw him on TV because he was doing an impersonation of, oh God, he's just gone completely out of my... Jimi Hendrix. He was doing a Jimi Hendrix impersonation, you know, lying on the floor, playing the guitar with his teeth, that kind of thing. And I just thought, get your own act, son. So, yeah, listen to this album, sound-wise, not great. I think it's got 3 great songs on it, and the rest of the songs are sketches, and I'd actually question the sort of emotional commitment to a lot of the songs. You know, it's emotionally underdeveloped, apart from the ones that, you know, I quite like. But you know, in this position now, all these years on, and I look back at Prince, you know, I am in, you know, he's a god, you know. So I started off not liking him, but appreciating him towards the end. But I'm not sure that this album is the, you know, magnificent event that, you know, followed, you know, that went forward into the ages, as it were.
I think that's really interesting, because what came to me after this was that an enormous body of work, which I think I appreciate, and I think it's difficult to pin it down to one era. This doesn't do it, but actually I think what I'm impressed by is his talent and his ability and his attitude, but I'm not sure it always carries over in a lot of the songs because of a number of reasons. And I think it's really interesting when you say that things were underdeveloped, because I wonder if that's part of his problem, was that he was so prolific that he never bothered to develop anything to its logical conclusion.
I think he did have a tendency to move on to other projects before he finished the one he was working on. And he did leave a huge body of work that had been recorded and never released as well. I mean, ridiculous numbers, you know, hundreds and hundreds of songs that had never seen the light of day when he died.
I was reading an article, an interview with the director, and he was saying they had a rough screenplay, but Prince brought in excess of 200 songs to the table for the director to go through and to then kind of craft a film around there. I mean, that is indicative of the amount of work that he was producing. And yeah, maybe some of it was unfinished, but I also think that's part of the sound of the album. There are moments where it is completely overblown, but equally there are moments when it's real. There's not a lot going on. I mean, there's no bass line in When Doves Cry. There's a real sense of, you know, stripping it down. His voice obviously is extraordinary. The guitar playing is extraordinary, and a lot of the tracks are carried by the voice and the guitar. And they don't necessarily need any more than that. I think they work very well with just that. Prior to this, he was genuinely doing it all by himself. His first 3 albums, he was playing the drums, playing the bass, playing the keyboards, playing the guitar, singing and producing them. And by the time his 3rd album came out, he was also producing 3 other bands at the same time. And he was he 17 when his first album came out? Yeah. And at that point, he was playing all those instruments, writing, producing, singing. You know, this guy could do everything. He was across everything. Extraordinary talent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even when you're talking about an album where he's everyone talks about this is all about collaboration, and he's still, half of it is stuff that is entirely his.
But I think that speaks more to his talent rather than his wish to control everything. Yeah, I think it's him because he could do it, and he didn't necessarily need to bring in.
Yeah, I still have a sense of it, which again leaves me in awe of the talent, but also makes me wonder about whether he was just constantly searching for something and was so busy looking for it that he never finished anything. He was just on to the next thing.
That's what I think, yeah. He just never seemed to see things through.
But actually, in the moment, so he's recording these songs and leaving them, but he's more interested in the process of doing something new. So some of the sounds on this, you know, I hated the synthy drums and the some of the sounds on it, which just sound like whatever was the newest technology in 1984 rather than anything else that he was playing with, and he's using it just because it's interesting at that point rather than...
That's valid though, isn't it? It's an extraordinary mix of live and instruments and electronic music, and it's quite significant at this point that someone's doing that. You know, there was a lot of electronica about, there was a lot of rock about, but the fusion of the two was quite extraordinary at the time. Yeah,
and I think he was really interested in doing that new thing. And I just don't like the sound of it.
You say it's valid, Chris, but I think only time will tell if it's valid or not, and some things just don't age well. And the thing that I think Nick's probably objecting to most, that I object to most about the album, is the sound of the drums, and not the programmed drums that Prince has done, but Bobby Z playing the drums on the live tracks and so on, and that gated reverb and heavy compression on the snare drum. It's just hideous. It sucks all the life out of everything around it.
But presumably that was a deliberate choice in the production.
It was all the rage at that time in the 80s. But it hasn't aged well.
But equally, you say time will tell. I mean, we're 36 years on from this album, and it's still in the Rolling Stones top 10 greatest albums of all time. It has stood the test of time.
Arguably.
For all that it is absolutely rooted in its time, it's still a very strong a very strong album.
I kind of found myself fantasizing whilst listening, and that if I could go back in time, I'd grab Dave Greenfield, the Stranglers keyboard player, and take him to play on this album, because the keyboard is just somebody pressing down the keys. There's no playing of it at all, and I really do think that could have helped. I mean, When Doves Cry is one of the better songs off the album, but the keyboards on it, just not good at all.
Let's start with Let's Go Crazy.
Ridiculous intro,
Yeah.
but an amazing song.
I don't mind the intro because the song is just absolutely top draw. It gets 3 ticks from me.
Before this, I didn't like the song. But then it's one of those that, and it won't be the last time I say that about a song on the album, that I've heard it but never really listened to it. And from the first listen, I thought, this song is better than we were given it credit for. It is a very good song, but the drums, Jesus Christ, the drums, they're horrible. They're absolutely horrible. Also, just the way it's mixed, you know, it's a guitar-driven song, but the guitar's so low in the mix, and it just doesn't make any sense to me. It's a song that is stymied by the production on it, which is a pity because it's a really good tune.
Fantastic vocals.
Yeah.
The delivery is just...
Guitar playing is fantastic as well, but the drums, I cannot get over the drums. The drums are appalling on it.
Get over the drums, Al. Get over the drums.
I can't either. I hated it. For that, it took me half a dozen listens to get over that. I really struggled with the start of this album because of the production, because of the sound of the drums. It was really difficult, and actually, I needed to watch the film to kind of take me somewhere else with it, because I was just listening to that terrible 80s drum sound, and it was driving me nuts.
But do you blame Prince for these drum sounds, or do you blame the 80s?
I blame the 80s.
I blame the 80s, yeah.
But that's kind of then unfair to judge the album.
I'm not judging that. I'm not.
Because of the time in which it was made.
Of course it's not unfair. What the hell are you supposed to judge it on if not what it sounds like? It's a ridiculous statement.
No, but you're
Yeah, because he could have gone and got the Stranglers drummer.
you're judging it for being of its time.
And when I give my final conclusions...
And only when.
And only when.
Brilliant song to dance to. It's just
absolutely
so much energy, but it's just such a happy, upbeat.
Yeah.
Do you go crazy when you dance?
Well, we all do, but yeah, it's a.
Unless you happen to be a small kid in a YouTube video, in which case it's not a great song to dance to. I don't know if you're aware of the, I think still ongoing court case about a kid dancing to Let's Go Crazy, which is very quietly heard in the background. And Prince sued. And I'd say I don't think the case has actually finished going through the courts yet. And he was utterly opposed to any of his music being on any streaming services or being online anywhere. None of his music was available online till he died. I don't quite understand. Well, a man who seemed to have quite a futuristic outlook, certainly in his music, was utterly opposed to the internet. He was crazy though, wasn't he?
There was a really bizarre moment late in Prince's career when he released his album and he gave it away free in Britain with, I can't remember if it was the Daily Mail or the Mail on Sunday.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, clearly he'd never picked up the Mail on Sunday or had any notion what the British press was like at the time. But I mean,
I don't think he spoke to any press at any point throughout his entire career. So
I get his point about giving away his music for free. He just wanted to get it out there. He was being stymied by his record company. It was all about making stuff, getting it out there. But of all the places to put it out with.
Can we leave the drums? Can we leave the drums now?
Well, no, it's impossible to separate the album from the drums. Unfortunately, I wish it was.
But I feel this is going to be a consistent theme throughout this discussion.
Moving on to Take Me With You, on the other hand, does not have horrible 80s. It's got moderately horrible 80s drums, but they're not offensive. And that was my favourite one of the songs that I didn't already know on the album, because it just sounds nicer than everything else. You know, it doesn't have all the 80s offensiveness going on.
Yeah, it's a very different groove, isn't it?
And it's a good song, gotta say. Liked it.
Yeah.
Yep.
I quite liked it. I thought it was flat, but there's a acoustic rhythm guitar behind it that I thought was really nice. So it got a tick from me for that. But I did think it was the start of the flat period.
But yeah, it kind of made me hope that the whole album wasn't going to sound that horrible way. And, well, it doesn't.
What about the beautiful ones?
This really grew on me. This was one that I didn't remember from way back, and it starts off as a sort of mawkish ballad, but then by the end of it, it's just wrenching. It's just extraordinary. It's just a kind of primal scream by the end of it, and I think that transition that you don't even really notice. You kind of the song starts and it's that falsetto kind of delivery, very very slow, not a lot going on, and by the end he's just absolutely screeching it. And as I say, it's really kind of gradual and incremental, and you suddenly get to that point and thinking, how did we get there from that gentle beginning? And for that reason, I think it's
this was the one that made sense when I saw the film. And because I was listening to it going, what the hell's going on here? And then you see the film and I'm like, oh, that's what he's doing. And actually somehow I was, despite the terrible acting and all the other things going on, that's where I suddenly kind of, okay, I see this. And actually that vocal performance made sense.
I think it sounds a bit like maybe the fourth single from a successful Pointer Sisters album or something like that, where they've run out of the best songs. But to be fair, as you say, Chris, it builds up very well, great dynamic. And it's not just the singing, the instrumentation as well builds really rather nicely. And yeah, I got to say by the end, every time when it starts, I'm a bit like, nah. By the time it gets to the end, I'm thinking, yeah, all right, not a bad effort. But you hate it, Will.
Yeah, I've just written one word, yuck. Absolute dog.
Yeah, you like the Pointer Sisters.
I do. So I was very offended when you said the middle of the road Pointer Sisters. No, honestly, didn't like this at all. Move on.
We'll move on.
So Computer Blue.
It's rubbish, isn't it?
I mean, like the last one, really. I mean, not a bad song, but this is where I'm starting to feel that there's no emotional content in the performances of many of the songs on this album, and this the same. It's just it's not sung from a place from the heart. It's automatica, if you like. So it's okay, but it's not soul.
This reminded me of Giorgio Moroder or something from that kind of sort of middle 80s period. It's the most kind of synthesized of all the tunes, and it's very very cold and it's very very stark, and it's one of my least favorites of the album.
Yeah, it's one or two songs of the album that I think are actually quite bad. It's just indulgent pap, really. I don't think it's good at all.
There's something slightly emotionally stunted about the lyrics in all of this. I mean, I don't know what age Prince was at this point. I mean, he's not an old man, but yeah,
about 25, 26.
Yeah, mid-20s, I think.
Just I don't think he's paid a lot of attention to his lyrics, particularly in a lot of stuff, and there's no emotional depth to a lot of it. You would have to say now, if you're making a dance record, a funky record, does that matter? Maybe not in a lot of cases.
Certainly on this album, I think he's a performer first rather than a poet. He's not trying to tap into any of those great universal kind of issues of humanity. It's a performance. And it is a soundtrack album.
Which is interesting because he's trying to tell a story. He's making a film, and yet he's not necessarily telling a terribly emotionally mature story in any of the lyrics.
Well, I think that goes back to the whole idea that I have, and I think you have as well, Nick, that he just didn't really see stuff through to completion. And it's all very well to, I've written some music, here's some words, that'll do. And you might do that, but you go back and finish it at some point. You'd write some decent lyrics for it and before you put it on your album, rather than just churning out some more stuff and then going on and writing another 230 songs. But then it comes back to the fact that he is capable of going and writing another 230 songs. I mean, that's amazing talent.
But he is also capable of great kind of emotional depth, and A Sign of the Times is an extraordinary album in terms of the issues and the emotions that tackles, which was what, three albums after this?
I don't know whether he is capable at his best of capturing something in a line that is really evocative, but it just sometimes seems a bit hit or miss.
I'm being a bit generalist here, Chris. I mean, I think it's fairer to say that although he obviously was capable of writing great lyrics and finishing a song, for want of a better term, that he didn't always do it. And, there is a feeling that sometimes he just churned stuff out. But because he had so much stuff going on, and if he was doing it because of a lack of talent, that's a lot worse than doing it because he's, mentally he's already moved on to something else, which I do get the impression was the case with him from what I've heard and what I've read about him.
I think there's a bit of a misrepresentation of that. I think one of his biggest frustrations was the time the music industry took to actually get stuff out there. So one of his big frustrations is that idea that he'd write something, he'd record it, it was finished, he'd move on to the next thing. 18 months after writing those songs and recording them, he was then having to go and tour them. Yeah. And in those 18 months, he'd actually produced 3 more albums.
Yeah, for a man who was so opposed to the whole idea of like streaming and music online and so on, he was actually the perfect artist for these times where you could actually record and have stuff online and available and on sale immediately, and where musicians now are encouraged to write more, record more, because that having more stuff out there for sale is what's going to actually make you some money out of it.
Anyway, should we move on to Darling Nikki?
Darling Nikki, what did you make of this?
I think it's rubbish, isn't it? I mean, juvenile tripe. It's just rubbish.
It's puerile, it's infantile, but it's quite sleazy. It's quite entertaining in a sleazy
We're talking
way.
about the emotional immaturity of the lyrics, and here we are.
Here we are.
For me, this is the other bad song on the album. Not even going to say any more about it.
I wrote down it's Pound Shop Rocky Horror Show songs. No, not good.
The only thing that really kind of that makes me like this is the fact that it offended Tipper Gore.
Yeah, but because of Tipper Gore being offended, it was the start of the PMRC, which caused nothing but problems for bands ever since. That's Prince's fault, Prince. Why I oughta. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing to analyse. It's just childish, isn't it? I mean, it's just being shocking for the sake of being shocking.
Yeah, so we're moving on from that one now. No point discussing it. It's just a bad song.
Okay, well, we'll move on from Darling Nikki then.
To When Doves Cry.
Well, I love When Doves Cry. It's not just the best song on the album.
Yeah.
As far as I'm aware, from what I've ever heard, it's the best song Prince ever did by a country mile. I think it's incredible. I think it's wonderful. It's weird. It's wonderful. It's just great. Although I've got to say that the edited down single version is better than what's on the album. It's overlong. It just goes on a bit at the end, which is a pity because it's near perfect. I think it's just great. And yeah, that thing about there being no bass on it, Chris, there's not just no bass, there's no bottom end to the sound either. It's really unconventional in the way that it sounds because of that. And yeah, I never really thought about that till quite recently, but it really, it's such an odd sounding song. Man, it's great. It's great.
This was apparently chucked into the mix overnight when the director of the film told Prince that they needed one more track.
Really?
And he went away and came back the next day with When Doves Cry.
Wow.
Which,
I think the vocal backing on this song is just incredible. The best on the album.
Yeah, you mean
really
the harmonies in
great
the
vocal
chorus,
backing.
yeah?
Is that not Prince? Because he used to actually harmonise with himself on a lot of his recordings.
Yeah, I think does anyone else play on that record? I don't know.
But whatever, it's great. I mean, towards the end when they bring on that really kind of wilted Moog synth, it was like, oh no, you're not going to go out on this. And then they bring that guitar in on the end, which has made me much happier. So yeah.
It's got a kind of noise like a chainsaw in it, hasn't it? It's got that zingy kind of noise going on it. It's just an extraordinary sound.
I love it. I love the sparseness of it, the openness of the sound and so on. I mean, I like music that's like that. That's got dynamically, apart from being too long.
But this is an example of where he can actually tap into some kind of deep emotion.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not denying that you can do that, Chris.
There's something that he captures there. There's poetry in this one. There's heart.
Yes, agreed.
I would accept that. Yeah. So how do you feel about I Would Die For You?
Nah, it's all right. Not one of my favourites. Not one of my favourites. It's okay though.
Is Prince doing Prince very well? It's kind of feels like it's been churned out with not a lot of effort. It does the job. it's great. I mean, it's still a good track.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of bands would be really happy to have that song in their repertoire.
I wonder whether it would be a better song if there was a little bit more space. It feels rushed.
That can happen when you play live, everyone's drunk. Because there's nothing to do between soundcheck and the gig, right? Apart from go to the bar.
Yeah. Occasionally, singers just walk off the stage.
It's been known to happen.
And they don't come in on songs. I've
that's the opposite of rush, though, isn't it? That's
flushed.
Very leisurely. I will only miss my cue once.
But yeah, I mean, it's okay, isn't it? Yeah. And I mean, I'd say the same about Baby I'm a Star. It's nothing special, but it's all right, isn't it? I mean, again, it's a live performance. It's good spirited.
Yeah, that's the one that kind of most washes over me.
I can't actually remember what it goes like. I don't know how many times I've listened to it.
But then we get to the final one, Purple Dirge.
That's hard.
Sorry, Purple Rain.
It's a bit unfair.
Guys.
Well, I say that I've always loved When Doves Cry, and I have, right? I've always hated Purple Rain, the song, because it is so dreary. But the thing is that, like Let's Go Crazy, until we've decided to cover this album, I'd never listened to Purple Rain, even though I've heard it thousands of times. I'd never listened to it. And on the first listen to the album, I had to admit to myself that it's a much better song than I've ever given it credit for. But once again, like Let's Go Crazy, I cannot get over the awfulness of the drums on it and how they overpower everything else. They are so loud and plodding. Just give us some normal sounding drums and it's twice the song, 10 times the song. It's quite good. It's pompous, it's over the top, it's nonsense, but that's none of those things are necessarily bad. Yeah, I've warmed to it a great deal through this process, which is a good thing, It's seen as a classic all-time great rock ballad, and if a month ago, if you'd said to me it's a classic all-time great rock ballad, I'd have said, no, it's not. But now I'd say, yeah, I see where you're coming from. It's not one of my favourites, but, it's okay.
Apparently this started life as a country track.
I think I might have read that
and
once.
Prince brought in Stevie Nicks to work on it with him, and she didn't really know what to do with it, and he just started then playing it with his band, and the Revolution started to lay down some more substantial, meaty guitar tracks, and it started to rock out a little bit, and decision was to take it in that
I'd heard that.
more, as you say, kind of pompous, overblown direction, and completely changed the shape and sound of the track. But you can kind of, if you listen to it, you can kind of get those country. You can see it working as a kind of pared down, stripped down country. Yeah.
Maybe we should do it as a country number.
Purple rain, purple rain. Purple rain, purple rain. That's working, yeah.
The thing that struck me with this song was the extraordinarily long outro of it, where it kind of finishes and you think, it's just wrapping up now. And you kind of look and there's still 3 minutes left to play. And it just goes on.
The strings are great at the end. They're really good.
It is a great ending, but it's an extraordinarily long ending.
That's how you close the film, mate. You should know that.
Hundreds of people will be credited.
I mean, that's actually one of the things that made me warm to that track, really. And I'm a bit like Al, I didn't always like it, but on repeated listen, I was coming around to this. I was amused by that story about Stevie Nicks, and I'd read that as well, and I really liked the idea that apparently he'd sent her this 10-minute long song, a country version of, and said, see what you can do with that. And she just said, I felt overwhelmed and I couldn't do anything. So I had to go back to him and go, I can't do this. And so he was then left in the lurch and had to go back to the Revolution and come up with something different. That's what probably I would think if Prince sent me a 10-minute long country song instead.
I'm not sure what I'd think if it happened now, but I was talking the other week about having seen an interview with Susanna Hoffs, and she was talking about Prince and how he liked the Bangles, and they were recording. What the hell would the album be? It wasn't all over the place, and it wasn't everything. It was on Between Different Light. She basically got a phone call from him saying, "Could she'd go and see him in the studio. So she went round and he was presented with a tape, and it was Manic Monday that he'd written, and he wanted them to have it to record it, and yeah, they did, and it was like their first huge hit single, I think. So he was good at sometimes coming out with hit songs. Yeah, Chaka Khan, I Feel For You, that was a Prince written song, wasn't it?
Yep.
I think he was very generous with his music, wasn't he?
Was he generous in collecting the money for it?
You mentioned earlier, Chris, about it being at number 8 in the Rolling Stones' recent top 500 albums of all time. Are you surprised that it's so high in the charts? Because I am.
I think if you're listening to the album just in isolation, then it's probably not the 8th greatest album ever recorded. But if you take this as what it did for Prince, the point at which it came, the fact that, you know, that there was a point where Prince was the Purple Rain, the film was the number 1 film in the cinema charts. Purple Rain, the album, was number 1 album, and Dove's Cry, I think, was the number 1 single all at the same time. And then he won the Oscar for Best Original Song in the genre. So if you take all that into its entirety, it's that which makes it the 8th greatest album of all time, I think. And in those circumstances, yes, I think it does deserve its place. 1984 was about Prince. You know, he owned that year. He did,
and
okay, I mean that's a valid point of view, but I don't agree with it. I think you've got to, if you're going to say this is the best album, then it has to surely just stand up by itself without having to contextualize why it's like if you have to explain why a joke's funny, you know, if you have to explain why this is the best, other than the fact that listen to it and it's really good, if you're having to say yeah, but there are many albums you can make a similar argument about.
The current Rolling Stone Top 100, number 1 is Marvin Gaye, What's Going On? And you can't separate that from what was happening at the time when it was made.
You cannot separate any album from its context, because it's a piece of, like any art, you cannot separate it from its context. It is informed by and informs the context. So you have to do that. And What's Going On, actually, interestingly, for it being the number 1 at the moment, when we are in a time of political unrest and global weirdness, it just seems appropriate that is actually something that talks about, that is all about conflict, and you know, so that makes kind of sense at this moment. And so there's lots of things, and I guess I don't know what it is about this album in 1984 that made it that. I think there is something about of the fact that you've got this character, this person, this artist coming out and being something so different. I suppose maybe it's something about the time of when the world's starting to get its head around AIDS and all sorts of other stuff that we're talking about sex. And you've got Frankie Goes to Hollywood in the UK, and you've got Prince.
Well, yes, that was something I was going to talk about with Frank Goes to Hollywood, but I just felt that I might be off on one again if I did. But yeah, them arriving at a time when AIDS was it wasn't starting to become, but AIDS had become sort of a thing that everyone was terrified of, and to have this band who were so openly gay, even though only 2 of them were gay, and this disease that was seen as a gay plague at the time, completely unfairly, obviously.
But it's something about being sexually provocative that is powerful at that point.
Yeah. However, can I say, Chris and Nick, that I think you two would be absolutely happy to completely ignore the context of an album that you didn't like, if you didn't like it, to say that it wasn't good. In fact, I'd stake cash money that you'd happily do that if you didn't like an album. So while I take your point on board, I also think you're talking nonsense to a degree.
There you go.
I just can't envisage that anyone could listen to that album and think this is the best album ever. I mean, come on. It's not that good.
It's not. No, I agree.
But it's an incredibly important album made by an incredibly important musician, and the time that it was made and the context around which it was made is incredibly interesting. And some of the songs on that album are actually, you know, top of the pile, very, very good, excellent, and some of them aren't. But that doesn't stop it being an important album by a very important artist. Can we disagree on that?
I think we can agree on that. Well, I think that's well put.
It sold 25 million copies worldwide and is one of the biggest ever selling soundtrack albums. So, again, if we're trying to measure, is it a great album?
So, what are you saying, that it shouldn't be so high, or it should be behind the Bodyguard soundtrack because it's the biggest selling album of all time?
Well, of course, the Bodyguard album should be in the top 5 Rolling Stones. The greatest albums of all time.
Do we want to go down a Kevin Costner wormhole at the moment? Because
yes, yeah,
I was involved in a Kevin Costner argument the other night, which still hasn't really kind of resolved itself. Yeah.
They never do with Kevin Costner.
Was it about Waterworld?
It could have been about any of the enormous number of shit films that man has made. But
I'd say No Way Out is a good film, though. That's what Kevin
Bull
Costner.
Durham is quite good.
I quite like Field of Dreams, I think.
Oh, Bull Durham is good.
Field of Dreams. I love
Bull
that.
Durham
That's
really is good, isn't it? Yeah.
But that's it. It's only made 3 good films. The rest of them are awful.
Yeah, and
The Untouchables is quite good.
Oh, I quite like that.
well, so we were watching The Untouchables. That's what started it.
All right.
And it's not a great film, but it is a good film.
No, it's not, and all sorts of faults. And actually, the point was that Kevin Costner is only good when he's basically playing himself, i.e., a uptight arse.
Language.
Hi, I've got a Kevin Costner story to throw in here as well, just quickly. Your friend and mine, Chris Jody, when he was at film school, he was complaining to me one night when we were in the pub about how people, when they had that conversation of what you're doing, like, I'm at film school, and people would then always ask him, what's your favourite film? And I can understand that got quite annoying. So I was thinking, well, what you should do is tell them a film that isn't awful, not Plan 9 from Outer Space or anything like that, but that is obviously no one's idea of anyone's favourite film, and just to see how people react to that. And the one I thought of was Dances with Wolves, but then I thought, take it even further and get the title wrong. Tell people your favourite film is Dancing with Wolves and see if they correct you because it's your favourite film. And if they do, just be like, no, it's Dancing with Wolves. And also just the idea of, as I say, naming a film that's worthy but dull, but it's not bad, right? But if surely that's no one's favourite film, right? And yeah, I don't think he ever did it, but that would be a brilliant thing to do.
On that note, shall we take a pause and then come back to discuss the rest of 1984?
Yes, let's do that.
Cue music.
Okay, welcome back. We're going to talk about our favourite albums and singles of the year. Let's start with Nick.
My favourite album of the year is probably, I'm going to go for Madness, Keep On Moving, which is an album which was, the last album before they kind of, Mike Barson left and they broke up for the last time, so they were sort of on a slightly downhill trajectory, but I think it was when they matured into a really remarkable band, and it's an amazing album. So Michael Caine is on there, so that was just...
I like Michael Caine.
Yeah, but I would recommend you go back and listen to that. There's some really great mature pop songs in that. They were really starting to come together as a band. They'd moved beyond the sort of Complete Madness, Absolutely stuff. They were no longer the ska band. They were a proper mature, I don't know how you would describe the Madness sound.
Nutty Boys.
The Nutty Boys, but they're not the Nutty Boys. They're not just the Nutty Boys at that point. That's a mature, jazz-inflected sound, and that's a great album. My favourite number one single of the year, I'm going to go for Do They Know It's Christmas?
Oh,
Band-Aid, because it was recorded on my birthday, and it's such an important thing, and it's one of those singles that I can sing every lyric.
Favourite album has to be the first Smiths album, The Smiths. Although I actually prefer Hatful of Hollow, which is also released in 1984, but that's a kind of compilation album. Well, it's a compilation album. It's not a studio album. And single, I'm going to go for The Power of Love by Frankie Goes to Hollywood, which I think is a beautiful song.
Bunch of old romantics.
Obviously, Relax and then Two Tribes had both hit the charts beforehand. Big, brassy, ballsy tunes. And then Power of Love came out, which is just something very, very different. And wonderful lyrics, just soft, gentle, but absolutely heartbreaking.
It's a good song.
Favorite single of the year. So, Will?
No, I'll go last. Oh.
I think my favourite number one single of the year is probably Nena, 99 Red Balloons. Mostly because it's just a good power pop tune. I kind of prefer the German version to the English version, but, whatever. Either is fine. But it's also that whole sort of Cold War paranoia, fear of being wiped out by political stupidity and all that. It's very much of its time, but it's also like something that's kind of come back into our world today. My favourite album, something a little bit more obscure. I am going to go for Texas Fever by Orange Juice, which is a very short little album they put out. The last one they did as kind of a full band before it all kind of fell apart. They have one more album. It's good up-tempo pop songs. I particularly like the song The Day I Went Down to Texas, and last song on it, A Sad Lament, which is one of their very best. And I love Orange Juice as a band. I think they're fantastic. Will, what about yourself?
Could I beg to sort of co-own the Smiths?
Mm-hmm.
Because it genuinely was one of those albums that just knocked me sideways when I heard it. Back about 10 months earlier, I was sitting with friends in a pub called the Fighting Cocks in Moseley in Birmingham that was fairly famous for having punk, rock, post-punk bands on. Quite a small room. 30, 35 people, 40 tops. We go there every Friday night. We don't care who's playing. It's just go there to hear music. And this band get up, and they are absolutely just incredible. So we pluck up the courage to go over and speak to them. And we kind of said, we're helping curate music for a Labour Party gala in Cannock, Staffordshire in the summer. Would you play at it? And they said, yeah, ask our manager, and pointed over to the other side of the room. And it was like, oh my God, they've got a manager. Anyway, they were the Smiths, and they came and played at the Cannock Labour Miners Gala, because Cannock was a mining town. And my friend's band, A Dog Named Ego, I think I was thrown out of it a month before or something like that. They also played with them. So my friend always walked around saying, I supported the Smiths, which is a nice one.
Wow.
And I go around saying, and I actually taped the drummer's drums down.
I almost supported the Smiths. You should get that in a t-shirt, Will.
I so should.
That is amazing, though.
But anyway, they came and played. And if you look online, if you say the Smiths, Cannock, you get this story about them being bottled off stage, which is, I was there, and it's absolutely not true. So it's really weird. We none of us know how this story got up there.
You threw bottles, but they refused to get off the stage.
They refused to get off stage. They were just amazing. When we saw them play again, and then when this album then came out after a few months afterwards, it was like, wow. So that's why I'd like to kind of co-share that one with you. I'm sure
there's enough of that album for both of us.
Yeah.
Then there's enough of that album for both of us, Will.
And in terms of singles, I think it's going to be I Feel For You by Chaka Khan, which, interestingly, is a song written by Prince himself.
What a great choice.
The circle is complete.
So what's next?
The thing we really, really need to do next is draw this to a close. But before we do that, we've got to figure out what the hell we're going to talk about next time. The random year generator threw up
2011. More recent than some of our other previous choices. I've gone for Let England Shake by PJ Harvey. It's an album I know quite well, but I haven't listened to it for quite some time, so we get back into it again. It was a big album of the year. It kind of did the business. It topped all the charts.
Yeah, I've heard it, but I don't think I've ever listened to it. So interesting. Yeah, look forward to that.
Weirdly, I got it again. I got it a couple of weeks ago. I think it's a brilliant album.
I don't know well enough. I'm a Stories from the City, Stories from the Sea guy. That's one of my favourites of all time. But I don't know this album as well. So I am really looking forward to this, actually.
So is this how it ends?
I think this is how it ends.
With a whimper, not a bang.
We'll go with a bang next week, but hey, this was 1984, so let's just relax.
Don't do it.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Right, I'm going to press stop.